All right, here we go. Michael Franzese, welcome back.
Good to be back, Vlad.
How are you doing during the whole quarantine and so forth?
You know, I've been asked that many times, but I spent almost 3 years in the hole in prison. So this quarantine's been a walk in the park for me, but, not too bad.
I know, right? Compared to solitary confinement, this is great.
Piece of cake.
Well, you actually have some new businesses that are forming. So, for example, you have a pizza franchise called Slices.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. An ex-mafia guy starting a pizza restaurant. I mean, it's...
Well, listen, it goes back. I got one of my old relationships that I know for 35, 40 years, has been in the restaurant business forever. So he came to me about a year and a half ago and he says, Mike, I want to go back into pizza. And I said, Tony, come on, everybody and their brother has pizza. What are we going to do that's different? Long story short, he spent a year and a half researching, and we came up with a pizza that's delicious, amazing, and a concept that separates us from everybody else. So we're franchising. We've got 4 stores now, and we're continuing to go. And today, I live out in Newport Beach. We're getting word that there's going to be protests and riots here. So I got to go protect my store because it's going to be right in front of where my store is. So we may see some old school kind of things happening today, Vlad. We'll see. Hopefully not.
Okay, so what if a group of protesters, or looters in this case, approach your store with baseball bats?
Vlad, they're not going to take us easy, I'll tell you that. I mean, I'm old school in that regard. We protect our own. So hopefully that doesn't happen. We don't want any confrontations. And look, I respect the peaceful demonstrations, and I respect the protesters. No doubt they have a right, and I think we need change in this country. But when they take it, across that line and they start destroying businesses and going after people, that's when we put a stop to that.
Well, apparently in your old neighborhoods in Brooklyn, the old mafia guys aren't taking too kindly to all the looting and so forth.
No, and they shouldn't. I mean, I got word last night that a bunch of my old associates, friends of old associates from Staten Island, handled some business there last night. I mean, why should we accept this? I mean, these people have no right to come into our neighborhoods and destroy our businesses and go after our property. That's absolutely wrong.
Well, you grew up with a father who was not only in the mafia, but was always surveilled by the police, always followed, always harassed, and so forth. And I remember one of your interviews, you said that you grew up hating the police.
That's correct. I did.
Okay. And apart from them harassing your father, why did you hate the police so much?
Well, I saw my dad as my hero. I mean, he was my father, and I saw law enforcement as the enemy. And in many ways, because of the way they conducted themselves. I mean, I had a few skirmishes, and I want to be clear, this was FBI agents, and these were, detectives assigned to the organized crime division. It wasn't beat cops. We didn't get involved with beat cops, but these were detectives. And at times they just didn't conduct themselves properly. Man, I had many skirmishes with them, growing up. And I saw them as harassing my dad, harassing my family. So, that's the mentality that I had growing up.
Okay, what kind of skirmishes did you get into?
Well, I told this story often. I mean, I was 10 years old playing ball in the street, and a kid throws a ball over my head. We lived on an incline, so the ball rolls down to where 2 detectives were sitting in the car. Well, as the ball approached them, the guy in the driver's side gets out of the car, and he stops the ball with his foot. And he was a big guy, and he had a suit on. And when I got to him, I said, "Hey, officer, can I have my ball back?" And he looked at me, pulled his jacket aside. He had a gun in there, and he said, "This is for your old man one day." Kind of scary stuff when you're 10 years old. So, stuff like that. And then when I got a little older, when they would surveil my dad, once in a while they would surveil me, and I would take them on a wild goose chase and, go through, different areas of the neighborhood. And they would, one time they tried to arrest me for it, but they brought me home to my dad instead. So a lot of stuff like that. And then, I actually had my first encounter, real skirmish with them, I would say, when I was walking the line with the Italian American Civil Rights League and Joe Colombo. I actually got pretty well beat up by one of them, by a bunch of them, billies clubs and all. So, I mean, I had my fill of that, no doubt.
Well, a lot of times you have criminals with a badge, just like how you have criminals on the street. In your experience, how often do you see dirty cops that are really just plain criminals who feel that this might be a better way for them to make money?
Well, listen, back in New York during that time, you got to understand, New York was kind of we were the stronghold for the mob throughout the country. And we had 750 made guys throughout all 5 families, guys that actually took the oath. We had a lot of associates. So within that group, we had a lot of friends, neighbors, relatives that were cops, detectives. And so we had a relationship with them. And as a result, they would do our bidding for us at times because of the relationship that we had. So, I saw many cops on the edge, so to speak, and, during my time. Now, I want to make this clear. I don't think that's the rule. I think that's the exception. And then again, you're talking about mob guys who really know how to maneuver and work with guys and so on and so forth. So, we knew how to get these guys to do our bidding, allow them to make some money. But again, that's the exception, not the rule. And I want to make this clear because I know a lot of people listen to this. I do not believe, I believe that the cops that are doing the wrong thing today, they're certainly in the minority. It's not the general way that these people work. It's a minority. And Vlad, people talk about racism. Racism exists everywhere. It's going to exist until the end of time. It's a fact of life. It's among cops, among doctors, lawyers, priests, you get it. It's just a fact of life. We have to learn how to deal with it, how to control with it, and hopefully how to eliminate it at some point.
Well, when you see the rioting that's happening, I remember there was one video that was circulating. It was like this white guy that looked like he wanted the looters to burn his store down for the insurance money. Insurance scams, at least in the movies with the Mafia, seems to be a big thing. Were you involved in this type of thing when you were working?
Yeah, big time, because you got to understand, my targets, Vlad, back in the day, I aimed high. I went after the government, defrauded them out of taxes. I went after the banks. They got a lot of money. They're insured by the FDIC. And I went after insurance companies because they can afford it. So yeah, I was involved in a lot of insurance scams. As a matter of fact, I had an insurance company that was located in the Virgin Islands. That was their base. And I would get them to write financial guarantee bonds. And these bonds would be used to guarantee loans from the banks. And the banks would use them as collateral. So back in the day, yeah, I did that. And I beat the insurance company and the banks. I didn't care. Like I said, I aimed high. I didn't go after the little guy on the street. That was just my way of dealing with things.
Yeah, I mean, it's a crazy time right now. Did you watch the video of George Floyd getting strangled?
I did.
What did you think?
I think it was horrible. I think that cop was totally out of order. I think all 4 of them should be held accountable. There was no excuse whatsoever. That cop, there was people on the streets telling him to stop. George Floyd was telling him he couldn't breathe. I mean, that was 100% out of order. And I don't know why all the cops haven't been arrested yet, I'll be honest with you. Yeah,
well, at this time of filming, the main cop, Derek, has been arrested and I believe charged with 3rd-degree murder and manslaughter. The other 3 cops have been fired but not charged. We'll see what happens. There's supposed to be new developments every day, so we'll see. Well, since our last interview, your father, Sonny Franzese, passed away.
Yes.
And he was over 100, right?
He was 103.
103. I mean, we should all be so lucky to live to 103.
That's true, Vlad, but what people don't understand, my dad went off to prison in 1970. He did 40 years out of the last 50 of his life in prison. And I tell people this, yeah, he lived to 103, but nobody would have wanted his life for the past 50 years of his life. It was that bad. I mean, look, he lost his daughter. My sister died of an overdose of drugs. My brother was a drug addict for, the story, 25 years, eventually turned informant against my dad. He contracted the HIV virus. My mother died in 2012 while my father was in prison. The last years of their life I can only describe as being ugly because my mom, held him responsible for everything that went wrong in her life, 33 years without a husband. And it was just, one thing after another for him. So he suffered greatly those last 50 years of his life. But yeah, I mean, look, he was a fighter. He was strong. He had a strong will to live. And at least he died out of prison, which for me was a blessing for him.
Yeah, I lost my dad last November. I think shortly after our interview. So yeah, it's tough.
Sorry
for
for
your father.
that. Yeah, it's tough, And look, I looked up to my dad. We had our differences, obviously. We had a different ideology in the later part of our lives, but I respected him and I loved him. He was my father, and for me, he was a good dad. Growing up. I mean, I have to say that.
What do you think your best memory of your father was?
The best memories were as a kid. I mean, when he was finally, or when I should say, when I had him around to just be dad. Times when he would come and visit me, when I watched me play ball, and we went out to eat. And times he would take me up to his business in the record business, and I met a lot of people through him at that time. The times we spent at the Copacabana. I remember, my graduation when he threw a huge party for me in the back of the yard, put up a big tent, had big entertainment, had 500 people there. He took me to the Copa to see Dionne Warwick. Me and, my whole class, it was probably about 50 of us. We had ringside tables, and, those are great, great memories of my dad. He was a good father growing up. I mean, I loved him.
What do you think it was your worst memory?
Seeing him, carted off to prison for what I thought would be a death sentence, 50 years, visiting him in prison at times, and the times when, contract on my life that my dad went along with, I was told, even though he denied it. Those things hurt, and, it's hard to rationalize something like that. So those are tough memories.
Yeah. I'm sorry for your loss. How's the funeral?
I didn't go, Vlad. There was some trouble brewing in New York at that point in time, and I paid my respects with him quietly when nobody was around.
Okay, so you mean to tell me that going to that funeral might have caused a violent outburst somehow?
Well, it's not that. I didn't want to become the center of attention there, and there was some rumblings in the neighborhood, and, I wasn't there for that. This was my dad's time. I wanted people to be able to pay their respects. I had seen him not too long before that, so I paid my respects very quietly to him by myself, and I felt that was the best way to handle it.
Yeah, I mean, there was some drama around my funeral, my dad's funeral. Then when I started speaking to some of my friends, a lot of them would tell me similar stories. Like, you would think that funerals are the times that everyone comes together and hugs each other, but a lot of times that's when a lot of the bad feelings come out, the anger comes out, the old issues come out, and a lot of people don't attend funerals. My friend Godfrey, who's a regular on the show, he didn't go to his father's public funeral. He went afterwards by himself. So, yeah, I mean, this is common, and it's unfortunate.
It is, and again, you don't want to become the center of attention. You don't want to take anything away from what people are there for, and that's to pay their respects.
Well, before I go on, I want to just touch on a business you have, which is coaching.
Yeah.
So explain to me what your coaching business consists of.
Vlad, throughout the years, I've been asked so many questions, and people are seeking my advice about business, about certain aspects of their lives. And I've been doing that, all along as much as I can. But during this pandemic, and I've had people ask me all the time, you should be a life coach. You should be a business coach. You have so much experience in so many different areas of your life. And I've been doing that for 20 years anyhow, just for people that would come and seek my advice. So during this pandemic, when I had time to think and I was home, and so many people were communicating me through social media and other ways, I said, you know what, maybe this is something that I should really devote some of my energy and skills to. So I connected with some people that have been pushing me to do this throughout the years. And we created a website, and we created a community now where people can actually become part of my crew, and we can provide them with advice and information. Me personally, I get personally involved with a lot of people, and I try to respond to their questions, give them some business, advice and experience that I have. And it's amazing how quickly it's grown. I mean, there's so many people out there, and I guess during this pandemic, it's been highlighted in their lives that need advice in so many different areas. So I'm devoting my time and attention to that. What's really great is this community that we created. Now people are talking among one another that have maybe similar struggles or challenges or issues in their life, and they're now talking among one another and getting advice from each other. And then, I'll come on once a week and we'll get personally involved and answer questions. And it's been really productive. We just started it. It's only the last 2 or 3 weeks, but I'm really encouraged with what I see happening so far.
No, that's great. That's great. So I like the concept of them joining your crew.
Yes. Well, listen, everything with me, I still have that old mob mentality in a way. So, other people have members, I have a crew,
Nice. And we'll go ahead and put the website in the description underneath.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
People want to join, they could go ahead and click on it.
Great.
I know we've actually, in your previous interviews, we put links to some of your books. We've actually moved a lot of books based on the stats that I saw.
Have you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I get reports. I don't look at all of them, but I get reports from my publisher, and they're selling books. They're happy. They're happy.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, since our last interview, I've interviewed a lot of other mob guys or mob-related guys, some of which I think you've seen. I interviewed John A. Light. Did you guys know each other?
We don't. I never met John A. Light. He was a different era than me, I believe. Never spoke to him, never heard of him, don't know who he is. He did try to reach out to me a couple of years back, and I think in an email or something, or I wished him well. And that was the extent of it. We've had no communication since then.
Okay. There's also, and this interview hasn't aired yet, Frank Collado.
Never met Frank. I know he's in Vegas. I know his history a little bit. When these guys turn informant, you kind of read about him later on, you hear about him. And he's kind of a mainstay in Vegas, I know, but I don't know him. Never had anything to do with him at all.
Do you remember when the mob started not taking over, but actually launching those casinos in Vegas?
I do, yeah.
Okay. Was the Colombo family involved in that at all?
To a degree, yeah. I had a relationship with people at the Dunes Hotel at the time, and a couple of the Colombo guys also did, and we were involved to a degree. It really wasn't our thing totally, but yeah, we were involved. Everybody had a hand in Vegas. Morris Schenker, who owned the Dunes at that time, I had helped him get some funding through a union for the hotel that he was building in Atlantic City.
Okay. And a lot of us aren't old enough to remember what that was like. We go to Vegas and it's all corporate, the Wynn, you could buy stock in the Wynn, and, it's very much of a family kind of environment these days. It's very commercialized. It's really based on all the shows and everything. But what was Vegas like back then when the mob was running these casinos?
It was a lot better. I can tell you that. You didn't have all the corporate nonsense you had to deal with. The Gaming Control Board, for some reason, they were a little bit more lax than they are today. Today, they're very strict, very stringent. And it was wide open. And, I had a blast way back when in Vegas, back in the late 70s, early 80s. It was just a whole different town. And, you ask a lot of the old timers that were in Vegas at that time, they said it was a lot better when we had a lot to do with it. When the mob was in control of a lot of the areas in Vegas, it was a lot better. It was more enjoyable. The shows were better. Everything was better back then. Now it's different.
Right. And you've always been involved in the whole gambling business. When you were active, and to the point where you would deal, and we've talked about this before, you dealt with professional athletes. These days you actually talk to professional athletes about the dangers of gambling.
Yes.
And, me personally, I'm not a gambler. I'll go play a couple of slots and feel stupid and go back to my room.
That's a good thing.
I just always felt like I worked too hard for my money to go into a place where I know I'm going to lose it.
You're right. Absolutely.
But you said something interesting in one of your interviews. You said that all the guys that you dealt with who were hardcore gamblers, all of them told you they could quit anytime, but none of them could.
Exactly. Every gambler will tell you the same thing. Whenever I want to quit, I can stop. No problem.
What is it that makes gambling such an addictive thing to people?
You know, it's the thrill of winning. It's not even the money. It's the thrill of winning, because if it was the money, they would stop when they got the money that they needed or wanted. It's the thrill of winning that does it. I'm convinced. You know, Michael Jordan said something very interesting recently in one of his interviews. They asked him if he had a gambling problem. And he said, no, I don't. He said, I have a competition problem. And you know what? In Michael's case, that's correct, because the gambling doesn't affect the losses don't affect his lifestyle in any way, shape, or form. He can handle it. Doesn't matter. Okay, so he doesn't have a gambling problem in that regard, because it's not interfering with his life. It's not causing him havoc like most other gamblers have to endure. But he does have a competition problem. It raises the stakes in whatever he's competing in to know that he's got money on the line. So with him, agreed, competition problem. With everybody else, it's a gambling issue. You know, it's like, who was it? The other basketball player, I forget. Charles Barkley. He said, I don't have a gambling problem. He lost $10 million at the table, but he doesn't have a gambling problem. You lose $10 million, you got a gambling problem. Trust me on that. But I have never talked to a gambler. Let me clarify that. 95% of the gamblers I talk to say they can quit anytime they want. And that's not true. I haven't seen any of those group able to quit whenever they wanted. They're always in trouble.
Well, the term you always hear in the movies is degenerate gambler.
Exactly. It's a harsh term, but it's the truth. They just can't stop. It's addictive as anything else. It's as addictive as alcohol or drugs or anything else. And Vlad, I've said this, I've seen more people addicted to gambling throughout my life than I have for drugs or alcohol. It's that bad.
Well, I guess where the mob differs and has somewhat of an advantage over traditional gambling is that the mob would give you a line of credit. So you didn't actually need the money to gamble. You gamble with someone else's money. And then when you lose it, you have bigger problems.
Exactly. I'll tell you what happened in New York. I don't know if you remember when they brought off-track betting into New York. You know, some of the cops would come to us. They came to me, and I remember, and they said, oh, we're going to put you guys out of business now. We got off-track betting. And, you know, mob guys and everybody on the street, they love to gamble at the track. You know that. It's big in New York. And I said, really? Let's wait and see. Why? What happens? Okay, you go to off-track betting, you got to put your money down. That's it. They don't give you credit. So what happens when you lose that money and you don't have any more to put down? You go back to the bookie. They actually increased gambling on the street when off-track betting came in. And by the way, you know, the footnote to that is off-track betting went broke. They went bankrupt at some point. I can't understand how a gambling operation can go bankrupt. They should have put us in charge. We would have made a ton of money for them, really.
Well, now you have companies like DraftKings that are public companies.
Right.
They actually buy stock. It's a whole different ballgame now. Now you have these poker tournaments online that you could bet whatever you want.
I know.
Online gambling is now an established legal thing that can be tracked, and you're not worried about someone just stealing all your money. Do you think that just increases the number of degenerate gamblers out there?
Without a doubt. It's always access. You know, the more access you have, you know, the more people that are going to gamble. It just makes it easy for everybody. And look, gambling is, it's a tough thing to control. It really is. And look, all the leagues, you know, the NFL, they tell you they don't want to see gambling in the sport. Well, that's not true. They don't want their players and their personnel involved in gambling, but they want people gambling. Why? Okay, if you live if you're a Patriot fan, okay, that's your team. You're going to bet on your team. Okay, but if you're a gambler and you have access to gambling, okay, you're going to bet on all 10 teams that day, all 11 games, whatever it's going to be. So they want, you got more, you're actually increasing the fan base when you allow gambling on the sport. So all the leagues, they really encourage gambling from people outside of the sport. They want it to happen because it increases attendance and viewership and interest and everything else.
Well, remember in the movie Casino, Frank Rosenthal, a.k.a. Lefty, he got that casino because he was considered the best gambler out there. He would find an edge. And I remember at the beginning, they're like, you know, he knew how the hardwood reacted, and he knew if the quarterback had a pregnant girlfriend and everything else like that. Did you know Frank at all?
I didn't know Frank, no.
Okay.
I did not.
But you knew of him?
I knew of him, sure.
Okay. From your point of view, what kind of edge could someone like that get when it comes to public sporting events?
Information is very helpful. That's why they always tell, players in the locker room, what goes on in the locker room stays there. Do not be giving outside information, who might be injured, who might be having an emotional problem. They don't want any of that information to go out because it does give a gambler an edge. Because remember this, Vlad, it's never about winning or losing. It's about the point spread. It's all about the spread. So any information that you have that in some way can affect a player that can then affect the point spread is valuable. And look, those handicappers, the guys that set the odds and the numbers in Vegas, these are knowledgeable people. I mean, they don't always get it right, obviously, but they get it right a good percentage of the time. And really, in gambling, that's all you need. You need to have the edge a good percentage of the time. And if you do, quite often you'll come out on top.
Well, you had a story where you saw Michael Jordan bet Horace Grant $5.
Correct.
What happened?
It was at they were playing table tennis. And they bet for $5, and obviously Michael won. And he came over to Horace, and he said, "Where's my $5?" And Horace had a warm-up suit on. He said, "Well, I don't have any money on it. I have it in my room." And Michael said, "Go get it." So Horace goes up to his room, comes back, and hands Michael the $5. And Horace looks at him and says, $5, Michael? I mean, what's the deal? And Michael holds it up and said, "This is my trophy. I beat you." And that's what makes me really believe that with Michael, it's just the competition. I mean, what does he need $5 for, But it's the competition. So, but he's a hardcore gambler. Don't let anybody kid you. He loves to gamble, and he's hardcore. He'll gamble on anything. It's funny, you know what? I was with Mike Tyson the other night. We went to dinner, and we were talking about, he's training. He looks great, by the way. He's in great shape, and, he's training for a fight. So I said, "Mike, are you going to really do that MMA thing?" And he was with two of his trainers. And they said, "No, we don't want him doing that." But I said, "Mike, do you enjoy that?" He says to me, "Michael, I love to watch two bugs fight. I'll watch them fight all night long." He said, I want to see everybody fight, and I want to watch it all night long. That's what he's into. It's that competition. It's that adrenaline rush that he gets. Same with Michael.
Yeah, you guys had a great interview, by the way, on his podcast.
Yeah, he's great, Mike. He's just so real and so sincere. I mean, he has no filter, as you know, but I love him. I really do. I got to like him a lot.
Well, since our last interview, Ori Spado came on my show.
Yes.
And said some harsh words about you.
I sort of feel sorry for Michael, I gotta be honest with you. And I'll tell you why. He's living a life that's not his own life. He should wake up, face who he really is. I mean, he proclaims to be a born-again Christian, correct?
Right.
Well, then that means he reads the Bible.
Right.
Now, look, I don't go to church. I was born a Catholic. I'll die a Catholic. I go to church when there's nobody there. Once every couple months, maybe. So I could have a talk with the guy one-on-one. I don't know a damn thing about a Catholic religion. I don't know nothing about any religion. But I do know certain things. And I think it's Exodus 20:16 in the Bible. If you're going out preaching it, then you should live it. And I feel that's what Michael should do.
You don't think he's living a godly
He's living
life?
his father's life. He's very jealous of his father. He hasn't seen Sonny in a year. He proclaims he's there all the time. He claims I use his father's name. You think I'm going to use a rat's name? And you show me anybody that calls somebody else a rat, they're the rat.
Right, because he said that he felt that you actually...
Bullshit. Show me a 5K1. Show me a proffer statement. Show me a reverse proffer statement. You won't find one in my entire fucking lifetime. And not a person has been investigated, arrested, or anything because of Ori Spado. I could look in the mirror. I could put my head on the pillow and I go to sleep. Well, what about Michael Franzese? You want to talk about who he ratted? Huh? I got a piece of paper here. I got a fucking list of shit about him that I know. I know he's got $50 million in Panama, or at least that's where it originally was. You want to know who put it there? I know the lawyer. I'm not going to tell you his name. All right? His initials, RP. Oh, I know.
When you saw that interview, what'd you think?
Well, I didn't see the whole interview, Vlad. I don't watch all of these things, but obviously, you know, I have a lot of followers on social media, and immediately they say, hey, Mike, this guy's talking about you, and so on and so forth. That's how I hear things, you know, because I don't watch all the interviews. As a matter of fact, Patrick Bet-David, you know, Valuetainment, called me when he was doing the Sammy the Bull interview. And he said, Mike, you know, did you see the interview? And honestly, I didn't watch it. I watched a little of it because he asked me to watch it. And I kind of corrected him in a few spots on that interview. But anyway, listen, I'm going to tell you about Ori. I met Ori one time. I don't like Ori. I'm going to tell you a story about Ori. Jack Gilardi, who was a big agent for ICM, very dear friend of mine. You know, he's kind of a legend in the business. He passed away not too long ago. But he calls me up one day and he says to me, Mike, there's some guy by the name of Ori Spado is up here and he's kind of threatening me and he's using your name and your father's name. He said, you know, what am I supposed to do? I said, let me tell you what to do. The next time he comes into your office, Jack, pick up a chair and hit him over the head and throw him the heck out. He's a nobody. He doesn't belong with anybody here. Don't listen to anything he has to say. There's nothing he's going to do to you or for you. Get him out. Well, Jack's not the type of guy to hit somebody with a chair, but that was what I told him about Ori. Let me tell you this. If Ori was around my father as much as he said he was, I must have been a ghost because I never seen him. I never heard of him until I came out to California and my brother started hanging out with him. And I know they were doing some drug stuff together, so I chased Ori. That's number one. Secondly, I had somebody in the FBI who came to me and told me, don't go near this guy, Ori, because he plays both sides of the street. He's an informant. And it came out later that he was. I know the agent that he was talking to. As a matter of fact, it's on YouTube, that he had a whole discussion with an agent. So, I mean, you know, Vlad, I got to tell you this. A lot of guys, this has been happening all my life. Quick story so that you know. I'm 20 years old, 21, 22 maybe, I don't know exactly. I'm in the San Suzanne. It was a club out in Long Island, my father was associated with that club. He had a silent interest in it, right? My father had been in jail. I'm in the place with a couple of guys. The owner comes over to me and says, Mike, there's a guy at the bar and he's bothering this woman there and he don't want to leave. He said, maybe you can talk to him. And I'm a young guy. So I go and see him and I said, look, this young lady, she doesn't want to be bothered. Why don't you just leave her alone and have a drink? You know, otherwise I'm going to ask you to leave. He looked at me and he said, do you know who I am? Now you got to understand, I hate that line. I hate that line. You know who I am? I said, no, who are you? Tell me who you are. He said, do you know Sonny Franzese? I said, yeah, I know him. He said, Sonny's in prison. I make one phone call to his son, Michael, and he'll be down here in a minute, and you'll treat me a little differently. The point being, now, it didn't end nicely for him, I got to tell you that, but the point being that people have been using mine and my father's name, mostly my father's, my whole life. You know, there's guys on the internet now that are talking about my dad because that gives them relevance, because what else do they got to talk about? So they associate themselves with my father. There's guys online now that are saying things about me. I know why, because they're getting more views. They mention my name and all of a sudden they get views. You know, so a lot of these guys, Vlad, believe me, they're just wannabes. They never were. And what can I tell you? And I want to make this clear too. Okay, all these guys that talk, when we took that oath and we were made, that was very serious to us. Anybody that didn't take that oath, you could have been a doctor, a lawyer, the president of the United States, we consider them a sucker. That was the word. You don't take the oath, you're a sucker. We had a bond between us. There was information that we shared that we weren't allowed to share with anybody else. I had guys on my crew that I was very close to. I wouldn't share privileged information among made guys with them because I couldn't, and I wouldn't violate my oath in that point. So guys that talk about made guys, most of them are full of baloney because they don't know the real story. They're on the outside looking in and they want to be relevant, they want to be tough guys, and so they mention things like this. You know, but I've been dealing with that all my life. It really doesn't bother me. I'll be honest with you, Billy.
Well, after we put out that interview, you gave us an offer we can't refuse.
Yeah,
And you offered to do a joint interview with the two of you.
I did.
You and Ori. And we reached out to Ori about that, and he turned us down.
Of course, because he was absolutely, whatever he said, he could never say in front of me because he has to be lying if he mentioned anything. I don't know the guy. Honestly, I just chased him.
Yeah, I mean, we even offered to have armed security in the studio in case anyone felt uncomfortable or whatever else. And yeah, he turned us down. So
Well, of course.
that would have been a hell of an interview.
It wouldn't have lasted too long, Bad. Let me tell you, because I guarantee he'd either run out the door or I would have made him look so foolish. I mean, it doesn't make sense. I don't know. But again, guys want to be relevant, so they mention the names of people. How many guys mention John Gotti's name? Because they want to be relevant. If they don't mention John Gotti's name, who's going to pay attention to them? I mean, really. Look,
Yeah.
I knew John. Okay, we didn't hang out together. We weren't best friends. We had a couple of skirmishes together, a few sit-downs over a flea market and a little bit in the gas. But, socially, we would see each other because we went to weddings together. We had to go to funerals together where we were at the same places. So, but other people that mentioned John and they knew him like they were best friends, it's all nonsense, Vlad. Trust me. It really is.
So I want to talk about some of the people that you used to be associated with. The first is Gregory Scarpa, who was the main hitman for Colombo boss, Persico. Now, this guy had some aliases. Can you tell me what they are?
The Grim Reaper, that's the one I know of. Well, let me correct something. When you say he was the main hitman for Persico, this is another fallacy that people don't understand. When you take that oath and you come into that life, Vlad, you are capable of doing what needs to be done. And I got to be careful how I talk about this because I'm not one of those guys that go out there and want to brag about, I killed 100 guys and all that nonsense. Okay, but you're expected, okay, to be able to do work when it's called upon you to do it. And you understand what I'm saying. We're all capable. Everybody is capable, or you wouldn't be part of that life. You couldn't take the oath if you weren't capable of doing that. Now, here's the way it goes. There are some people, you reach a certain level in that life. There are some people that are earners, and obviously it's important to earn money for the family. So if you have that ability and you know how to use that life to benefit you in business, to benefit the family in business, well, you're going to move in that direction. If you're a guy that's basically a hanger-on, and you don't have that ability to earn money, well, then you're going to be called upon to do other things because you still have to have a value in that life. So it's not that you're more capable. It's just that becomes your role because you're not capable to earn the money like other guys can. So yeah, I'll say this about Greg. Greg was both. Greg earned money. Okay, he was an earner in that regard. But he also, maybe I should say, he enjoyed doing the work. He enjoyed it. Me personally, I wasn't a big fan of Greg's. He wasn't just a real pleasant guy to be around, it was that way. And I was around him a lot because he was, we were on Carroll Street in Brooklyn quite a bit. But, you know the story with him. A lot of it is exaggerated, but a lot of it is true.
Well, why was he called the Grim Reaper?
Because it seems like he enjoyed doing the work. There were some guys that honestly, they enjoyed doing it. I mean, that was their thing. And he, I think, falls into that category. And he wasn't a very affable guy. He didn't have a smile on his face all the time. He was very serious in that regard. So I guess that's why he got the name. I didn't name him, but, he certainly got that name.
Well, according to the FBI, they believe that he murdered up to 120 people.
Here's my feeling. Let me explain this. Guys I don't know where there's 100 guys in that life to kill. I mean, you don't kill 100 guys when you're in the war. In Vietnam, I don't know one soldier that can claim to kill 100 guys and he's at war. Where are these guys? How could you kill 100 guys? If you killed 100 guys, you'd wipe out the whole Colombo family. We had 115 guys. So, I mean, this is, it's beyond belief Vlad. When somebody is telling you this, that every day they kill somebody else, every day they beat somebody else up, it's nonsense. Now, look, my father, allegedly, who was one of the main enforcers for the Colombo family, they only had him at 30 or 40. I guess he wasn't that capable, right? And that's according to the FBI. But even that, my father said, Mike, he's dead now, I can talk. He said, Mike, I killed a lot of guys, but it wasn't what the FBI said. My dad told me that. He has no reason to lie to me. We were both made guys. So how do you kill 120 guys?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going through the story. I guess in 1991, they say he committed 3 murders, but then they was suspected a minimum of 80 murders between the 50s and 92. And then in total, they're saying from 100 to 120 people were killed under this guy.
All right. I spent 25 years in that life. 25 years, Vlad. I can count on both hands the number of guys that I know that were murdered. I spent 25 years. I mean, that I personally have knowledge of. Now, you know, maybe in the other families there was stuff, but one guy in one family, how could he kill 120 guys? I find that very hard to believe. Even if the family went to war. My dad was in the war, and he can't claim that many killings. I mean, it doesn't make sense. Yeah, do the math.
Well, he was also called the Mad Hatter.
Yeah, that's true. I forgot that one. Mad Hatter.
What's that about?
Again, you know, the guy, he wasn't a likable guy. He wasn't an affable guy. You know, he talked about, you know, violent things more than another guy might have. So, you know, some of these guys were crazy. I got to be honest with you. They were a little loony, you know, and he falls into that category.
Well, I guess he became an informant for like 30 years.
That's what we heard. And boy, that was terrifying news. You know, even for me, because, you know, as a captain, I was around him quite a bit and we had a lot of discussions about certain things. And I said, man, this guy's going to put me in trouble too. You know, I mean, I didn't know. So yeah, when you hear that, you know, it's like Willie Boy Johnson, who was in Gotti's crew. You know, I was very close to him. I was shylocking money with him. And I heard he was an informant for years and years and years. I thought maybe I would have a problem with him. I never did, thank God. But yeah, I mean, it was frightening information when you hear that about somebody that was so close to us.
Right, because he was a capo for the Colombo family.
Yeah.
And you were a captain. So is that below a capo?
No, it's the same thing. Listen, the technical Italian mafia term is capo regime. That's it. Okay, but you shorten it to say capo. But the technical term is capo regime. That's what everybody, among each other, we called each other capo regime, soldier, boss, underboss, consigliere. That's how we spoke among each other.
Okay, and I guess Scarpa, as he was working with the FBI, he was tied into the whole Mississippi burning story, where I guess the FBI brought him to Mississippi to go hunt down the Klansmen that were involved in the murders, and he actually managed to do it.
That's correct.
Yeah, crazy. He eventually contracted HIV.
Correct.
And I believe he died of AIDS, right?
He did. He died of AIDS.
Well, there's also Roy DeMeo.
Another guy that had a crew, and you know, they did a lot of work, no doubt about it. I didn't have personal involvement with Roy. I knew him, we met, but you know, it's another crew. But he did a lot of work, no doubt.
Right, he was with the Gambino crime family.
Correct.
And once again, well, they're saying that his crew killed over 100 people.
You know, they throw these numbers around, but they're not identifying these people. You know, like, okay, let me tell you another thing, Vlad. If somebody's going to get on here and say that they killed 100 people, they're either in one or two categories. First category is they cooperated with the government, okay, became an informant, got immunity for all their crimes, including murder, okay? Second category, they never really committed the murders. So if you never committed the murder, you can say, I killed 1,000 people. What's the difference? Okay, so you're in one of those two categories. I'm going to tell you something. I had to do things in that life. I don't want to talk about it. Why should I? I don't have an immunity. I'm not an informant, okay? And I'm not proud of what I did. So what do I want to talk about? I don't think people want to hear about that stuff. I don't know. Maybe these mob enthusiasts or these mob junkies, and there's a lot of them out there, or groupies, whatever. They want to hear that stuff. I'm not interested in talking about that.
Right, because you did an interview on BuzzFeed and you had to answer questions, and one of them is, have you ever killed someone? And you were like, I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's like I said, I don't have immunity for things like that. Not at all. I never cooperated with the government to that degree where I was given immunity for my crimes. You know, so, and even if I, you know, if I didn't kill people, I would say, yeah, I killed everybody. What's the difference? You know, if that makes me a tough guy, then yeah, I killed 100 people. I'm not going to get in trouble because it never happened.
Well, I remember on the Tyson podcast, they asked you if you ever saw someone get put to sleep, and you said yes.
Yeah. And
this is during one of these, meetings.
What do you mean during a meeting?
Well, a sit down, like a sit down that turns into a murder, essentially.
Well, that doesn't happen at a sit down, Vlad.
Oh, it doesn't?
No. I mean, you may be called in for that, but if that's going to happen, it happens before the sit down. It's already happened. You may say you have a meeting you have to attend, but by the time you walk in that door, it's over. There's no meeting.
Okay. So, but you've walked into people where that's ended up happening.
Well, let's put it this way. I know of people that happened to, yes.
Did they know what was about to happen?
No. I mean, one of the horrors of that life, and I have to say it now, is that, you know, you're called into a meeting. You don't know you're in trouble. You made a mistake. It's already predetermined. You walk in, you don't walk out again. I mean, that's a fact of that life. It's an ugly fact of that life, but it happens.
Right. And I remember in an interview when you first became a made man, you and your father had a conversation. He said, as close as we are after, you know, if we have to do something together afterwards, we never talk about it again.
My father said to me, if you and I ever went out and committed a crime of any nature, one second after we committed that crime, if you ask me about it, I'm going to say, I don't know what you're talking about. So that's how I was brought up. That's what I understood. So to me, there are no war stories. I don't like to go back and talk about things that were of a criminal nature because it doesn't serve any purpose.
Well, another figure that you knew or were associated with somehow was Nicky Scarfo.
Yes.
Who was the boss of the Philly crime family.
Correct.
Now, Nicky had an interesting story because as he was going through his trials and arrests and everything, he had a son named Mark Scarfo who actually tried to kill himself. Mm-hmm. And essentially succeeded. He tried to hang himself. They managed to stop him from dying, but he went into a coma, and he was in that coma until he died. So essentially, his son killed himself, and it was allegedly because of all the pressure of what his dad was doing.
Yes.
So, tell me about Nicky and this whole story.
Well, listen, I'm not familiar. I mean, I don't have personal knowledge of that story. In other words, I wasn't a part of it. I wasn't there. Different crew, obviously, from Philly. But I knew Nicky fairly well, and I liked Nicky a lot. You know, I had a good relationship with him. And the main thing that we were doing, we were going to organize the security guards in Atlantic City. So we were planning to do that together. As a result, I met with him, you know, a couple of times in that regard because he had control in Atlantic City. But yeah, that was a very sad story. Look, Nicky was, he was one of those little crazy guys. I would say, even though when we sat down, he was pretty normal. But look, there is a lot of pressure on the children of guys in the mob. I mean, look, my sister became a drug addict. My brother became a drug addict. If you listen to my brother talk, he says, Mike, I don't know how we came out of that life anyway normal. And I said, well, bro, you didn't come out normal. You know, you had a lot of problems. He says, well, I don't know how you survived. I said, well, I don't know either. I guess I'm just blessed. But it's a whole different atmosphere growing up, especially when you have somebody as high profile as Sonny Franzese or Nicky Scarfo. I mean, it's a lot of pressure. It really is, Vlad.
Right. I mean, because when you hear these stories, you know, because his son, when he hung himself, was 17.
Right.
I mean, he was still in high school. And when you hear these types of stories with the families of these mob guys, you look at that story, then you look at your story with your family, and it's not much different.
Disaster.
And is this essentially most families are like this?
You know, I'm in touch with 3 sons of fathers that were in that life, 3 of them whose dads were murdered or doing a lot of time in prison. And every one of them have severe emotional problems, severe. And they took to me, we talk, and we had, I advise them or whatever as best I can, try to minister to them. But I mean, it's a lot of pressure on the families. And, young kids, they have I'll tell you something, I don't know if there's a relationship between these two, but I'll tell you, young kids have a problem, some of them coping with things. My friend is the chief of police over at UCLA, chief of police. He said once a month we have a hanging there from a student that can't accept the pressure of being in UCLA and succeeding. I was shocked at that statistic. He said almost once a month. Well, imagine what guys have to, what these young people have to go through with a father in the mob. Who's getting arrested? Who's getting locked up? Police come at 6 o'clock in the morning. Today you got money. Tomorrow you have nothing. Problem with your mom going through all of this. I mean, it's tough. It's very, very tough.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine being woken up at 6 in the morning and my family getting arrested and so forth. But that was just a regular occurrence for you guys.
You know how many times I went through that? I mean, my dad was arrested 5 or 6 times. And they always come at 6 in the morning, guns blazing, microphone outside the house, come out with your hands up. The rest of the neighborhood looking on, what's doing. Everybody now knows who you are. You go to school, you got to hear all the nonsense. Your dad's a mafia dad. I mean, this is a lot for a young person to handle. I mean, my sisters couldn't handle it. My brother couldn't handle it properly. So I understand. I don't know how, honestly, I don't know how I got out of there halfway normal. I really don't.
Well, at one point, you were actually paying Noriega.
Correct.
What for exactly?
Well, we were using Panama as, we had a compound in Panama when I was in the gas business. And the reason we chose Panama, because it was a country that had no extradition between Panama and the United States. If we ever had to go there for any reason, I never looked at that. That would be an asylum for me, but my partner, Larry Rizzo, did. And we were actually paying off Noriega so that we can maintain that compound and be assured that if we had to seek asylum there, we wouldn't have any problems. And it didn't work out that way for Rizzo. But we also were using Panamanian companies to run our gas business with. Because, a Panamanian company at that time, we only needed a company to have a bank account. And a Panamanian company at that time had bearer stock. So you didn't have to fill out a lot of papers. If you held the stock, you owned the company. So it was very simple. We had like 18 Panamanian companies.
How much did you pay Noriega total?
It was really dealt through Rizzo and Noriega, but we were paying him upwards of $50,000 a month.
Right. I just interviewed George Valdez.
Okay.
Do you know who he is?
No, I don't think so.
Well, he was one of the big drug traffickers during the 70s and 80s. Okay. He's a Cuban guy that was affiliated with the Colombians.
Got it.
And at one point, he had a plane that, was filled with drugs that crashed in Panama. And, he was arrested and he was actually tortured by Noriega. Mm-hmm. And then later on, he said how he ended up being locked up in the same prison as Noriega. And he said how great it was to actually see this guy, locked up. Later on, the U.S. actually ended up invading Noriega and then locking him up. How did you feel when you heard, years later about what happened to Noriega?
Well, how do I feel when I walk into the same prison and I'm in the yard and here he is in this cell right in front of me, looking like a monkey in a cage with his little orange suit. I walked up to him and I said, General, you remember me? You don't look as tough as you used to look with that military uniform. And didn't say a word to me or anything like that.
Was
Noriega a bad guy?
Well, he wasn't bad with us, but everything that we heard about him, yeah. I mean, look, I never was in Panama, never visited there, never had to go there. So I can't speak, personally about the experience. But from what I understand, he was a bad guy. Yes.
And you guys actually bribed politicians quite a bit.
We did. Yeah.
Okay, because I guess at one point, well, in order to get the gas business going, you'd have to keep bribing politicians to get all these licenses and everything else like that.
We paid them off to get, me in particular, paid off so we can get licenses to collect the tax. You had to have a license as a wholesaler to collect the tax.
Now, would it just simply be a political contribution, or is it much more stealthy in terms of how you get them the money?
It was both. Well, we did a lot of political contributions at the time for a lot of the heavyweights in New York. But there was more to that. There was envelopes.
There was envelopes. What's
Yes.
the most you ever given? What's the most you've ever given a politician under the table?
For me, at one shot, it was 25 grand.
Okay.
And back
Not a-
then,
not a
25 was significant money.
Right. And I guess
But
that
again,
you guys,
that's at one shot. And,
Yeah.
and a lot of times that was consistent.
right. And I guess at one point, the mob controlled all the security guard unions,
That's correct.
where all the, I guess, in 9 nuclear power plants, all the security guards were controlled by the mob.
Yeah, and I was actually with a fellow by the name of Danny Cunningham. That was my union. I controlled that. And, I don't know if you know this, but at the time, I don't know if it's changed. When a nuclear power plant was shut down, you had to have security there for 100 years after it was shut down. So we had security guards basically around there doing nothing and getting paid. But it was a great deal.
I bet. Well, the more I go through these mafia stories and interview people and so forth, the more it seems like a lot of people ultimately end up cooperating. Now, you yourself, you didn't put anyone in prison, but you did cooperate somewhat with the feds. John A. Light, he cooperated, against John Gotti Jr. Frank Collada, he cooperated. He was in the witness protection program. The list kind of goes on and on and on. Ultimately, what percentage of people do you think cooperate versus, take their time?
All right, let me, I think we have to make a distinction here because this is obviously something that's very sensitive to me. When a guy becomes an informant, enters the witness protection program, and starts going on trial and putting people in prison, that's one category. And Val, I've been on trial 5 times in my life. I want to tell you this. I have never, and I'll take this to my grave, I have never seen an informant, a cooperating witness, get on the stand, put his left hand on a Bible, right hand swear to tell the truth, and lie through his teeth. And that even included my brother, when my brother took the stand against my father. When somebody cooperates and becomes an informant, they do that because they don't want to go to prison. They can say all the things that they want. They can say, oh, they had a turn. They don't want to go to jail because the FBI tells them, you're going to spend the rest of your life here. You cooperate with us, we'll give you a break. That's why people become informants, okay? That's exactly why. In my case, I want to be clear. I took a plea. I took a 10-year prison sentence, $15 million in restitution, $5 million in forfeitures. There was no cooperation agreement at all in that plea. It's a matter of public record. You can go and look at it. That was it. I had done almost 4 years in prison when I was picked up in the middle of the night and brought into Chicago with this whole Norby Walters thing, okay? I had 18 months to go, maybe less, 16 months to go at my time, and I was out on the 10 years, because back then you could make parole. But even if I maxed out with good time, I had 16 months left to go. The only reason I took the stand against Norby Walters, number one, I was subpoenaed, and number two, because they threatened at that time to lock up my father and my brother because of involvement with Norby. I didn't want my father to have any more aggravation. And they had me on tape giving Norby, not me, I'm sorry, they had my brother-in-law delivering $250,000 to Norby at that time, okay, to be his partner. What happened was Norby was threatening people. I was in jail. He was threatening these athletes with using my name. I didn't know anything about that. I was in prison. When I took the stand against Norby, okay, I had first sent him a message. I said, Norby, they want to give you 16 months. Take the plea. Okay, you've been using us for 30 years in your life. Take the plea. Spare me the aggravation. Spare my brother and my father. He refused to do it. When they came in, all I said was, look, I gave the guy $250,000. It's on tape. I know Norby all my life. Yes, he was associated with us. As far as what he did, I don't know. I was in prison. That's the testimony. They had me on the stand a half an hour. That was it. Okay, so I didn't enter in a cooperation agreement, and I didn't testify against anybody else. I didn't put anybody else in prison. It wasn't my thing. I want to, because you give me the opportunity to say this, Vlad, so I hope you do print it. They brought me in while I was on parole to testify against John Riggy because I had information, and an informant had told them that I was John Riggy's partner. We were collecting $2 tariff on every window that was brought into Manhattan in the construction of a building. John Riggy and I were partners. I refused to cooperate against him because he was my friend. 10 days after that, they violated my parole and threw me back in prison. So all this nonsense about me being a dry snitch, it's all nonsense. Now, let me clarify this too, okay? Yes, I talk to the FBI now in general terms about stuff. I mean, I shouldn't say now. Back then, okay, yes, I cooperate with the police now. They take me into prison. I speak to young gangbangers and stuff like that. But I want to make this clear. Nobody ever went to prison because of Michael Franzese, ever. And Norby Walters never did one day. Not one day. I knew what I was doing with Norby. I understand this stuff. I've been around it all my life. He never did 1 hour in prison. So nobody ever went to prison because of Michael Franzese. I appreciate you letting me say my piece. Thank you.
But you see a lot of other guys do it.
Yes. Yes. Listen, let me tell you something. In my opinion, the racketeering law, the Bail Reform Act, they changed everything. Because under that RICO statute, you get so much time that guys just didn't want to go to prison for that length of time. No more parole. They abolished it. You couldn't get bail. You were either a danger to the community or a flight risk. Okay, the government won. What happened was the fear of the mob was transferred to fear of the government. So guys say, hey, I'm not going to go to jail for the rest of my life. And they became informants. That's it. And in that regard, okay, the government won. They had all the tools to make people turn. And you saw, there's a great line in one of the movies, The Bronx Tale. They asked, when Sonny was asked, what's better, fear or love? And Sonny, I think, said fear. Not true, because that fear can be translated or transferred to somebody else, and that's what happened in our life. But when somebody loves you, they're going to stand by you as much as they possibly can. But when fear can be transferred to something else, and that's what happened in my former life. Fear was transferred to the government, guys started cooperating, and it wasn't the young guys. A lot of old guys cooperated too. A lot of old guys just don't want to spend that time in prison.
Right, because since our last interview, Tekashi 6ix9ine ended up testifying against his entire gang.
Exactly.
We counted it. He helped give out over 70-something years to all the guys that he was involved with, and 2 guys are waiting life sentences right now. So, and he's on the stand, he's telling them everything. And as after he came out, he's playing the victim. Oh, well, these guys kidnapped me. Oh, these guys threatened my mother and everything else like that. But ultimately, what I always try to push is he only started to tell when he was facing a bunch of time himself. He put a hit out on someone that's on video that ended up involving a shooting later on that he paid for. He was getting people robbed. He was causing beef with people and so forth. And then when he got caught with a gun and stolen property and the video of him putting a hit out and he was facing 47 years, he told on everybody. And now he's, hip hop's, rat who raps about ratting. I mean, when you look at that, what do you think?
Again, he didn't want to do the time. He didn't want to go to jail. It's why these guys inform. They don't inform because they had a change of heart. I want to say this, and I'm using it as an example. Patrick asked me about Sammy the Bull, and what did I think about his testimony? And I heard what Sammy said. Sammy said that John was going to turn against him and put all the weight on him, that he had to take all the weight. I'll tell you why I have a problem with that, Vlad. And that's why he testified. That's why he turned, because John turned on him in that way. I'll tell you why I have a problem with that. John and I had the same lawyer at that time. Okay, he had Bruce and I had John Jacobs. They were in the same offices. I would go up to the office and I would hear there was 2,000 hours worth of tapes on Gotti and his crew. And I listened to some of those tapes with a couple of the guys that were listening to them, right? There was no way. John was all over those tapes, saying things, admitting things. There's no way he could transfer that to Sammy. John was the boss. So I have a problem believing that John was going to lay all the weight on Sammy, because it wouldn't have been a good defense, number one. And number two, honestly, I don't think that was John's style. I really don't. But what I said to Patrick, what you forgot to ask Sammy, he testified against 35 other guys. It wasn't only John. Okay, now, I'm not going to say anything. Maybe Sammy didn't want to do the time. Maybe he had another reason. I don't know, and it's not for me to comment on that. But for me, for the most part, guys snitch because they don't want to go to jail and do that amount of time. They don't want to die in prison.
Yeah, me and Sammy had a phone call where we discussed potentially doing an interview. He's a rough guy.
Yeah, well,
I mean, that personality is still there.
Still there.
Still
you know
there.
what got me in the interview, Vlad? You know what got me?
What's that?
I got to say this because it was funny in a way. The Machiavellian mentality. You know, Patrick asked him, he said, hey, you know, all these murders that you admitted to, 19 murders. And he turned about and he said, well, nobody ever asked me how I felt when I did that murder. And he said, I was at a funeral and I was staring at a guy who was laying in the coffin that I killed. He says, and I was mad at the guy. Look what you made me do. That's what I cracked up at that point. It's not funny. I mean, I understand that, but I'm saying, wow, look at that Machiavellian mentality, blaming the guy in the coffin, okay, that you had to murder him. That's unique. I got to tell you that.
Well, the Mafia was always a very secretive organization. But then you said when the Godfather movie came out, everything changed.
Yes, I mean, obviously I was just starting out when The Godfather came out, but I noticed that guys were more outward about who they were. You know, it was different.
Right, and what I didn't know was that Joe Colombo actually edited that script.
Yeah, Joe Colombo looked at the script. He took the word mafia out of the script. It was in there several times prior to that, but he deleted it. And I don't want to say he rewrote the script. That's going a little bit too far. But he made sure that there was nothing in there that he felt was offensive to our lifestyle. And listen, can't say it did damage. It was a great movie. It was one of the greatest movies ever made. So he didn't hurt it.
Right. I'm sure that his talks with Scorsese was kind of interesting.
Yes.
You know, because when I interviewed Frank Collada, he was actually hired to help work on Casino. So then in 1995, Martin Scorsese ends up releasing the Casino movie, which is based on this whole story that we talked about. And you're actually a consultant on that film.
Yes.
And you would actually sit on set with Martin and you would basically give your opinion on whether this was accurate, whether it was not accurate. And your character was played by Frank Vincent. Your name in the movie was Frank Marino. Tony's character was played by Joe Pesci. His name in the movie was Nicky Santoro.
Nicky Santoro.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, to me, I feel that Casino is Scorsese's best movie, period.
Oh, do you really? Well,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Yeah, I like it better than
Because
Goodfellas.
of me. That way. They'll admit it too. Nick Pileggi and Martin with Scorsese will admit that. I give him the insight. I tried to correct everything. Of course, you know, they exaggerate. You know, that has to be. People need to be. They like violence. People are crazy. They like violence. So they add on to it, you know.
Yeah, hell of a movie.
Thank you.
Hell of a movie.
And I did sit there in the director's chair right next to him.
You know, Scorsese was interacting with the real guys in the creation of these movies. In the first Godfather movie, there was a scene where the horse head ended up in that guy's bed. And you said that you never did anything like that, but you did some similar things.
Well, listen, that was unique. I mean, I wish I would have thought of that, but no, I'm only kidding. But it was a very memorable scene. I mean, look, you know, we would try to avoid violence, Vlad, actually. I mean, honestly, I should say. I mean, I did. It was kind of a last resort for me. So if we had to get a message across to somebody, it's not as dramatic as a horse head, trust me. But we made people understand that, do the right thing so we don't have to go to the next level on this. And without getting into detail on it, certain things that you just don't talk about.
Well, my final question is this. And I'm saving it for the final question for a very good reason. When you and I did an interview a while back, and we talked about the murder of Michael Jordan's father, and there was always the rumor that it had something to do with his gambling, and you felt there was some sort of connection between this event and Jordan's gambling. I interviewed Daniel Green, who was one of the 2 guys convicted of Michael Jordan's murder, who's actually doing life in prison right now.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's 2 guys involved. He said, the guy who I interviewed said that the other guy killed him and then went to him to help get rid of the body. The other guy is saying they were both together and Daniel Green was the one who pulled the trigger. Essentially, these are the only 2 witnesses in the whole situation, and they got caught because they were driving around in the Lexus and were making phone calls with the car phone, and other things that pretty much guaranteed them life in prison. Now, when I asked him, did Michael Jordan's father's murder have anything to do with gambling or the mafia or anything else like that? He said absolutely not. He said there's absolutely no truth in that. This guy had pulled over on the side of the road. He went to sleep. The motel he was next to was a drug spot, was a place where drugs were bought and sold. There was prostitution and so forth. There was a lot of illegal activity. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Someone saw an easy robbery that turned into a murder, and that's what happened. It had nothing to do with Jordan's gambling. When I tell you this, what do you think?
I listened to that also with Michael. I watched which I thought was a great documentary. I watched it, and I have to believe that the guy is telling the truth. You got to remember, back in the day, I was around, the NBA, and I was doing a lot of sports things at that time, and there was a lot of rumbling, and there was not a lot, but there were a few people that allegedly were in the know that was saying it had something to do with Michael Jordan's gambling. I think that's been debunked. I don't think that's true at this point in time, but it certainly was being talked about at that time because Michael had that gambling issue and so on and so forth. But I would tend to believe what we're hearing now. And look, these guys, I guess, would have no reason to. It wasn't mob related. I don't believe that. I've never said that. But I did hear that it has something to do with his gambling at the time. But again, rumors always abound when it comes to somebody like that. So I would have to say that, that was incorrect information at the time.
Right. Just to put it in perspective, these guys were 18 at the time.
Yeah.
They drove around in this stolen Lexus for a week.
Right.
And the guy that I interviewed ended up making a rap video at his house wearing the jewelry from Jordan's father, the watch and the championship ring that Jordan gave him.
Wow.
In a video that they found. So these were not, criminal masterminds that are orchestrating this retaliation for gambling debts. These are 2 dumb teenagers who were living in trailer parks at the time that got caught up killing someone who was extremely important and now are doing life in prison because of it.
Well, what you just said, described certainly puts a lid on it for me. It wasn't mob related. Mobsters do silly things at times, but not something like that. So, yeah, and I'm sorry if I even inferred that at the time, but that's what I heard. There was rumors going around and, everything was heated at that time with Michael and people were just speculating, but I'm glad to hear that. Well, I'm not glad to hear what happened, but I'm glad to hear it had nothing to do with Michael because that would be a tough thing to carry around in life.
Well, look, I've interviewed everyone around the murder of Tupac, another mythical figure, just like Jordan. And for years, the story was, Suge had him killed. The government had him killed. The cop switched the bodies and so forth. And I've interviewed not only people that were there with Tupac during the murder, but I interviewed Keefe D, who was in the car that killed Tupac. And they laid out all the events, and all the events have always matched up to the guy they beat up in the casino came back with a gun and killed him, which was the obvious choice. But to this day, people don't believe that. No, it was really Suge. Suge killed him so he could own his record masters, even though here's a guy that's 3 times the size of Tupac in a car. The car's randomly sprayed up from front to back. And you mean to say that you put a hit out on someone when you're sitting in the car with them? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is. And just so you know, Suge's lawyer is my lawyer, and I've known him for 35, 40 years now. And I don't believe Suge had anything to do with that.
Wait, are you talking about David Kenner?
Yeah.
Ah,
yeah.
Okay.
I know David for a long time. He's a great guy. I love him. And I don't believe Suge had anything to do with that.
Okay, because David Kenner was considered the mob lawyer when he went over to death row.
Well, he I don't know if he was a mob lawyer, but we trusted him and he represented a lot of guys. And until today, I mean, I spoke to David yesterday. So he's representing me on a legitimate deal, a contract that I'm doing. So yeah, he's a great guy.
All right. Well, I need a David Kenner interview. I'm gonna hit you up for a favor here.
David is terrific. You'll love him. Oh,
I know.
Have you ever interviewed him?
I've never even gotten a contact on him before. He's such a shadowy figure.
Yes.
I feel.
He's a great guy. I don't know if he'll agree to it, but I'll talk to him about it.
How does he feel? I mean, he wasn't Suge's lawyer at the point where Suge got his 28 years.
No, I don't believe so.
Did you ever talk to him about how he feels about his former business partner being in prison for possibly the rest of his life?
Not in depth, not in detail, no. But like I said, I know David a long time, and as a result of that, I don't believe Suge had anything to do with Tupac. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, Michael Franzese, thank you so much for joining us again.
Vlad, if I can say one more thing, because I think it's very pertinent through the things that we're going through now, and I know, I've gotten some tremendous followers as a result of these interviews, people that I still associate with, through social media. But, with respect to what's going on now, again, I totally condemn what happened with that cop in Floyd. I think it was 100% wrong. I think the culture of that police department and a number of police departments across the country needs to have a real good look at it. I think it's a cultural thing, starts at the top, really. And they have to kind of change the attitude. And if there is racism among these police departments, they have to do something to change that, without a doubt. And I stand by these protesters and these demonstrators. I think there's power in numbers. And I think when you have a gripe like this, it's good to get together because people listen when they hear numbers. But I believe in peaceful protests, peaceful demonstrations. I do believe there's something more behind these rioters. I think that they're trying to cause chaos. There is outside groups that are stirring them up. I think there's enough evidence of that to support that. And I totally, condemn those actions. But Black Lives Matter to me, no doubt about it. I have a lot of black friends. I had a lot of black friends in prison. We used to hang out together, play softball and racquetball together. And I've had black friends my whole life, and we always got along. So I just hope that something good comes out of all of this. I really do. And my heart goes out to Floyd's family.
Mine as well. Very sad time right now. Hopefully by the time this part of the interview airs, things would have resolved to a certain degree, meaning that some laws start to get changed. Things start to really move in more of a positive direction. But I mean, at this date, Donald Trump is not addressing the underlying problem of what's happening. He's just addressing the rioters. You know, he thinks that quelling the riots is going to fix the problem when it's not.
Yeah, I know that, Vlad. But look, I know there's so much. I mean, look, anytime anybody can take a shot, and I'm not saying you are at Trump, they do. But, Obama had 8 years too. I got to tell you this. I met Obama. I have pictures with him. We met on a beach in Hawaii. Really enjoyed, a short conversation that I had with him. And I was very high on him becoming president. I said, wow, we have a black president. We know racism exists in this country. Here's a guy that can go do a lot okay, make a lot of advance towards ending some of this racist nonsense that we have. And he was a real disappointment to me. I don't believe he did that during his 8-year term. You know, and I'll give you an example. The city of Chicago, his town, okay? I don't think he visited that town once in 8 years. There's more murders in that town than there is across the country. Why? You know, I felt Obama could have got in there, okay, and spoke to some of the black guys that are doing all of these killings and said, hey, get together here. And I know how I would have spoken to them to really lay down the law and stop all of this nonsense. So, you know, you can't lay the blame fully on Obama because this has been going on for a long time. But I think it was a missed opportunity with his presidency. And that's why, you know, Biden to me is a joke. I mean, this guy's been around longer than the tree outside that's 100 years old. And what has he done? You know, if he thinks he's going to come in now after 8 years as vice president and he's going to resolve everything, it's nonsense. This is going to take the whole country. It's going to take dialogue. It's going to take work. It's going to take counseling. No one person can handle this. But, you know, hopefully we do get it under control because it's a horrible thing that's going on.
It is. It is. And hopefully it will be improved. I mean, like you said, racism will always be there, but hopefully it will be improved and there'll be some laws enacted.
That's what we hope for.
Some of the cops will actually start to feel the ramifications of these types of murders and this type of abuse of their power.
They should. And I'll tell you, I think they need to charge all 4 of these cops. You can't stand around and watch this for 9 minutes and not do anything about it, Vlad. I think they're all responsible. They all need to be held accountable.
Yeah, and you know, I'm just going to end it with this. The whole concept of a policeman is usually not something that the best of the best aspire to. Like, when do you hear like a valedictorian at a high school say, "Hey, as soon as I graduate, I'm going to become a cop"? Right. When do you see the best and the brightest say, "Hey, I'm going to join the police force"? You never hear that. Some people say the FBI or the CIA or something, you know, in those regards, or some people want to be a district attorney or a judge or something like that. But when do you see the best and the brightest aspire to be policemen? You never hear that. So you have these group of people who are somewhat underachievers becoming this huge group of people who have guns and don't usually have ramifications for the violent actions they do against the people that they're supposed to protect. So I don't know. If you look at the underlying things where you could actually attract better people into these organizations, I think you'll see a change over time.
That's quite possible. I mean, I can't really speak to that, but I will tell you one exception. My daughter Amanda, who is a college graduate, graduated San Diego State. She was going to be a criminal justice attorney. That was her desire. Well, she wakes up one morning, she says, "Dad, I want to join the police department." And I was stunned. I said, "What?" She said, "Yeah, I want to do some good." She said, "I really feel that that's where I can do the most good." Very bright young lady, educated, and she really was committed to doing it. Problem was, Santa Monica Police Department, Newport Beach, there's a waiting list. You know, you couldn't get in. Otherwise, she might be wearing that badge today. But and so hopefully there are a lot more people like her that were just really committed, think they can do some good in the community. So look, you know, I know a lot of good cops, and I know a lot of cops that I'd rather not associate with. So it's like anything else, there's good and bad in anything. But again, starts from the top, the culture. Like I heard the mayor in Minneapolis say that he knew that there was racism going on in the police department for a long time. Well, you're the mayor. You're in charge of that. Why didn't you do something to change the culture of that department? This is where this whole incident started. Why didn't you immediately get in there and say, "Hey, we got to make some changes"? Grab a police chief that is sensitive to this and is going to make some changes. If you know that this is permeating throughout your department. I heard that. I was like stunned. It's a little late for him to be saying that. Should have said it when he became the mayor.
Okay, and I just don't want to lose the irony of what you just said.
Okay.
In the mix. That you mean to tell me that the daughter of a captain from the Colombo crime family who stole hundreds of millions of dollars from the government is now going to be a cop?
Well, she's not now. I mean, thank God she's got 2 children now and she had to get off of that. But she was really committed. She went through training. She did everything. I mean, and she scored very, very high. And I had some friends in the police department in Beverly Hills that were actually sponsoring her. And she scored high. She did terrific. But there was just too long a waiting list. And then she got married, got pregnant, had my grandchildren. So that didn't happen. But yes, and the irony in that, I mean, I would talk to my wife and said, do you believe this? Are people really going to believe this? I said, I don't know if she'll arrest me if I did something wrong. I said, she's that committed. So she might have done it. I'm telling you, that's her, that's her mentality. I got to tell you, all my kids, very law abiding. My wife, she wouldn't stand for me doing anything wrong at this point. She's had enough of that. She tells me straight out, you better do the right thing because I'm not going through any more of that nonsense. And I said, okay.
Oh, man. All right, we're going to end it at that. Michael Franzese, thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
All right, Vlad. Thank you. You take care.
Until next time.
Stay safe.
Peace. Yes, sir. You too.
All right, man.